6 episodes in, and we've got a problem.
What kind of problem?
If I told you there was a luxury material in the ancient world, rarer than silk, more valuable than pearls, owned only by emperors and wrapped around dead kings...
I'd expect to find it. Tombs, museums, shipwrecks. We find ancient bread, ancient cheese, 2,000-year-old butter in a bog.
Right. Gold survives, silver survives, pottery, obviously, but asbestos cloth? The thing every ancient writer couldn't stop talking about?
Where is it?
Gone. Almost all of it.
How do you lose track of something emperors were buried in?
That's the question. And here's where it gets strange. When archaeologists went looking, systematic surveys, decades of work, thousands of artifacts recovered, the famous sites had nothing.
Nothing.
Karystos, the asbestos capital of the ancient world according to Pliny, Strabo, Pausanias, 375 sites surveyed, 9,000 artifacts, zero evidence of asbestos production.
So where's the evidence?
Finland.
Finland.
6,700 years old, pottery shards with asbestos fibers baked right in, 300 archaeological sites across Scandinavia.
But the Finns never
wrote a word about it. Not one ancient text. Meanwhile, the Mediterranean world that documented everything in exquisite detail
left nothing behind.
So the people who wrote about asbestos left no physical evidence, and the people who left evidence never wrote about it.
That's weird, right? That's not just me being paranoid.
In a series about how information gets buried, how evidence disappears, how powerful people control what gets remembered and what gets forgotten,
this feels like the first chapter.
This is the template, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Asbestos, a conspiracy 4,500 years in the making, is sponsored by Danziger and Diano Mesothelioma law firm, Dandel.com.
Okay, so around 4700 BCE, and just to put that in perspective, that's centuries before the pyramids, before Stonehenge, before basically anything we think of as ancient civilization.
Deep time.
Deep time. People around Lake Saimaa in southeastern Finland figured something out.
What were they trying to do?
Make better pottery. They had a problem. Regular clay vessels crack under thermal stress. Heat them, cool them, they shatter. Super annoying if you're trying to, cook food.
So they experimented.
They crushed up this local fibrous rock, anthophyllite asbestos from metamorphic deposits in the hills, and mixed it into the clay. The fibers act as reinforcement, stronger vessels, way better thermal shock resistance. And here's the thing, this is actually brilliant material science, even by modern standards.
How so?
I'm glad you asked. So anthophyllite is a magnesium-iron inosilicate, right? Orthorhombic crystal system, double-chain silicate structure. The hydroxyl groups in the M4 cation sites require way more thermal energy to break than your serpentine polymorphs like chrysotyl. We're talking dehydroxylation temperatures above 850 Celsius versus maybe 600 for chrysotile. And because anthophyllite's got that prismatic cleavage along the C-axis, the fibers maintain tensile strength through the entire sintering process, right up to vitrification. And the coefficient of thermal expansion is close enough to fired clay that you avoid differential stress fracturing during the cooling phase. Plus, the refractory behavior means you're not getting mullite formation at the fiber matrix interface, which is actually the critical failure point for most ceramic matrices.
Okay, nerd.
What?
You just said M4 cation sites.
Did?
And prismatic cleavage along the C-axis.
Yeah, sorry. The point is, it worked. Neolithic Finns figured out material science that we can explain now, but they just knew, empirically, through trial and error over generations.
How do we know this for sure? Not just like, we found some old pots.
X-ray diffraction analysis. Levento and Hornietsky published the studies in 95 and 96. Scanning electron microscopy. Chemical fingerprinting that traces the fibers to specific geological formations in eastern Finland.
So this is solid.
Pun noted. 300 documented sites across Fennoscandia, thousands of fragments recovered, and the tradition spread, reached the Arkhangelsk region of Russia by the mid-4th millennium BCE.
Wait, this lasted how long?
Over 3,000 years. Some forms persisted in northern Karelia into the medieval period.
3,000 years of making pottery the same way?
When something works, you don't mess with it.
So why didn't the Mediterranean pick this up? They knew about asbestos. They were obsessed with it.
Different use case, different priorities. The Mediterranean wanted luxury textiles, cloth that doesn't burn, napkins you can throw in a fire to impress your dinner guests. Practical pottery reinforcement? Not prestigious enough.
Not sexy.
Not sexy. Nobody's writing home about their sturdy cooking pot.
Meanwhile, the Nordic people just used the stuff quietly for millennia.
And left evidence, because pottery survives. Ceramic fragments are almost indestructible archaeologically. Asbestos cloth, organic processing, woven fibers, probably buried with important dead people.
Gone.
Gone.
So the prestige product vanished and the boring practical application is in museums.
History has a sense of humor. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. Karystos, on the island of Euboea.
The famous one.
The famous one. Strabo mentions it, Pliny describes it, Pausanias names it specifically as the source of asbestos textiles. Linear B tablets from Thebes, we're talking 1225 before Common Era, reference Karuto. This place was important.
Okay.
The Southern Euboean Exploration Project has been systematically surveying that region since 1984. Over 375 ancient sites documented.
That's thorough.
Extremely thorough. Professional archaeologists, decades of work. And you know what they found related to asbestos?
Tell me they found something.
Zero.
Zero.
Nothing. And it gets better. Norway Archaeological Survey 2012 to 2016. 20 square kilometers surveyed. 99 new find spots identified. Over 9,000 stone artifacts recovered.
9,000 artifacts?
Asbestos-related findings?
Please say one.
Zero.
So they found the marble.
Spectacular marble quarries, giant 12-meter columns still lying in situ at Mount Ochi.
They found the roads.
Road systems, processing areas.
9,000 stone tools.
9,000 and change.
But the thing the place was actually famous for in ancient texts, the asbestos that Pliny and Strabo and Pausanias couldn't stop talking about.
Nothing.
That's impressively thorough absence. Either the archaeologists are spectacularly unlucky or
asbestos textile production is archaeologically invisible.
which is very convenient if you're in the business of selling magic napkins to emperors.
It gets better. Amiantos, Cyprus.
The place literally named after asbestos.
Literally. Amiantos is Greek for undefiled, the word we get asbestos from. Dioscorides, 1st century AD, explicitly writes, Amiantos stone is found in Cyprus.
So documented source, named after the product.
A modern mine operated there from 1904 to 1988, extracted approximately 130 million tons of material.
Wait, 130 million tons?
From one mine, 84 years of industrial extraction.
Okay, so what did they find from antiquity?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, what?
No ancient galleries, no tools, no processing debris, nothing.
130 million tons of modern extraction and nobody tripped over an ancient pickaxe?
Not one. Best theory? Surface deposits. Ancient workers probably scraped exposed veins, no underground excavation needed, and surface scraping leaves almost no archaeological trace.
So the ancient writers weren't lying.
They weren't lying.
They just had the good fortune to work in a medium that doesn't leave evidence.
Words survive. Cloth doesn't.
Must be nice. Trust me, the napkin existed. No, you can't see it. Yes, it was worth more than pearls.
That's the ancient luxury goods market for you.
You know, the gap between what people write down and what actually survives, that's something families dealing with asbestos exposure understand in a very different context.
Companies kept internal memos, buried medical studies, meeting minutes where executives discussed exactly what they knew.
And then turned around and said they had no idea. The paper trail exists. Someone just has to dig it up.
That's what Danziger and Diano, mesothelioma law firm, has spent over 30 years doing. Tracing exposure back to the source. Shipyards, refineries, construction sites, power plants.
Nearly $2 billion recovered for asbestos victims, $30 billion still available in trust funds.
If you or someone you love has been diagnosed with mesothelioma,
The consultation is free. Dandel.com. That's DANDELL.com.
okay, the obvious question, the one that comes up every time we talk about ancient asbestos.
If people worked with this stuff for thousands of years,
Where is the mesothelioma? Where are the ancient cases? Why don't we find it in mummies or skeletons?
I keep waiting for someone to CT scan a pharaoh and find a tumor.
Yeah, here's the thing. It's actually a really straightforward answer once you break it down. Multiple layers, but none of them mysterious.
Okay, layer 1.
Mesothelioma is a soft tissue cancer. It affects the pleura, that's the lung lining, the peritoneum, abdominal lining, the pericardium, heart lining.
Not bones.
Not bones, leaves zero skeletal trace. You could have a skeleton of someone who died of mesothelioma right in front of you, and you'd never know.
So, unless you have preserved soft tissue,
You've got nothing to find.
layer 2, how much soft tissue actually survives?
Almost none. Total soft tissue tumors ever identified in mummified remains worldwide?
Ballpark it for me.
18.
Wait, 18? Total in all the mummies ever examined?
18 cases. Only 5 of those confirmed malignant. That's from Forniciari's 2018 review.
That's nothing.
There was a 2025 study, Panzer and colleagues, CT scanned 45 Egyptian mummies, found 5 with probable soft tissue masses. That's 11%, and these are the best preserved bodies in human history.
The absolute cream of the preservation crop.
If you're not a mummy, if you're just a regular ancient person buried in the ground,
Your soft tissue is long gone.
long gone.
Okay, but layer 3. Has anyone actually looked specifically for asbestos-related disease?
No.
In a century of mummy research.
No researcher has specifically searched for mesothelioma in ancient mummified remains. No mummy lung tissue has been analyzed for asbestos fibers.
So it's not that they looked and found nothing.
It's that nobody's looked.
Interesting. A century of Egyptology, thousands of researchers, billions of dollars in funding, and the question, did ancient asbestos workers get sick, just never came up?
To be fair,
I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm saying it's a question nobody had a financial reason to ask.
that's actually a fair point.
Who funds paleopathology research? What questions get prioritized? Did King Tut have a clubfoot? Gets a documentary. Did anonymous textile workers develop occupational cancers? Gets nothing.
There was one study, Portuguese researchers, 2014, found calcified pleural plaques in medieval skeletal remains. Got some attention.
And?
They concluded it was tuberculosis.
Of course they did.
No, I mean, the evidence actually pointed to TB, infectious process, not occupational exposure.
The one time somebody found something adjacent to what we're looking for, and it's tuberculosis.
History continues trolling us.
Layer 4. Scale.
Right. Ancient asbestos workers, we're talking hundreds, maybe low thousands across the entire ancient world at any given time.
And modern industrial exposure?
Millions.
So, even if ancient workers got sick at exactly the same rate as 20th century workers,
The absolute numbers would be tiny, scattered across centuries, attributed to other causes. Invisible even if you were looking.
absence of evidence.
Isn't evidence of absence. It's the predictable result of soft tissue cancer, preservation bias, research priorities, and scale.
No mystery, no cover-up, just the way evidence works.
Or doesn't work. Before we close the book on the ancient world, let's be honest about what we actually know versus what gets repeated.
Myth-busting ourselves.
Exactly. The Vatican's 1702 specimen. You'll see this in popular sources. Asbestos cloth supposedly found in a Roman sarcophagus near Rome. Measurements given. Dimensions. Sounds very official.
Real?
I spent way too long trying to track down the primary source.
And
Couldn't find one. It's in secondary sources, tertiary sources, Wikipedia citations that lead to other Wikipedia citations, but nobody cites an actual archival document.
so it's a rumor with good provenance, like a historical game of telephone.
I heard it from a guy who read it in a book that cited another book that maybe saw a letter once.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Same problem with asbestos textiles from Pompeii. Sounds perfect, right? Buried by Vesuvius, sealed in volcanic ash, pristine preservation.
Except
Asbestos textiles haven't been confirmed from Pompeii or Herculaneum. The textile preservation there is carbonized organic fibers, wool, linen, cotton, all the normal stuff.
And we established that asbestos cloth was more valuable than pearls.
So finding it in a commercial city would be surprising anyway. That's like expecting to find a Picasso in a strip mall.
Ah, yes, the priceless imperial napkin right next to the fast food thermopolium.
Now, what can we actually verify?
Give me the good stuff.
Byzantine wall paintings. 2014 study by Kakuli and colleagues. They found chrysotile asbestos fibers under paint layers at the enclystra of St. Neophytos in Cyprus, dated to 1196 AD.
What were they using it for?
Fiber-reinforced plaster, same principle as the Finnish pottery, structural reinforcement, first confirmed use of asbestos composites in wall painting.
700 years before modern asbestos cement.
And Benjamin Franklin's asbestos purse, 1725. 19-year-old Franklin brings it from America to England, sells it to Sir Hans Sloane.
And we know this because
It's still there. Natural History Museum, London. Documented in Royal Society records. You can look it up.
So we know it's real because we can literally go see it.
That's the standard. Physical evidence you can examine. And most ancient claims don't meet it.
Pics or it didn't happen, but for archaeology.
Basically, yeah. So, 4,500 years. What do we actually know?
Ancient asbestos was real.
The pottery proves it. The written sources are consistent. Multiple independent writers across centuries describing the same properties. They weren't making it up.
It was rare.
Geological constraints. 2 viable source regions that we know of. Surface deposits that exhausted quickly. Plutarch mentions the Karystos veins were almost extinct by his time.
And it was genuinely remarkable.
I mean, imagine seeing it for the first time. You're an ancient person. Everything you know about cloth is that fire destroys it, and then someone throws a napkin into a brazier and pulls it out white and clean. Of course you think it's magic. Of course you think it's divine.
What else could it be?
Exactly. They didn't have the framework to understand silicate mineralogy. But ultimately, it was limited. The scale was tiny.
How tiny?
Ancient production was probably measured in dozens to hundreds of kilograms annually, total, across the whole Mediterranean.
And modern production?
2023 global production, 1.3 million metric tons.
Million with an M.
The Amiantos mine alone, 1904 to 1988, probably produced more asbestos than all of human history before it combined.
So the ancient world had a curiosity, a wonder, a luxury item for emperors.
And the modern world turned it into an industry that's killed hundreds of thousands of people.
That's the arc.
That's Arc 1. The ancient world treated asbestos as a miracle.
And the medieval world?
The medieval world treated it as an opportunity.
For what?
For the greatest con in history. Next time, a letter from a king who doesn't exist, a tablecloth that probably never was, and the medieval con artists who found the perfect product, something you could prove was miraculous just by throwing it in a fire.
Episode 7.
Episode 7. The Grift Goes Professional. You know what strikes me about everything we just covered?
What's that?
The ancient world had an excuse. Soft tissue cancer, 20-year latency periods, life expectancy of 35 if you were lucky. The math made it literally impossible to connect cause and effect.
They couldn't see the pattern.
They couldn't see the pattern, but we can. 3,000 Americans diagnosed with mesothelioma every year. And unlike ancient textile workers whose stories vanished, we know where the exposure happened. Shipyards, refineries, construction sites, power plants, Navy vessels.
And there's a paper trail.
There's a paper trail. Internal memos, buried studies, meeting minutes. The companies kept records of what they knew and when they knew it.
If you're listening to this and you or someone you love has been diagnosed with mesothelioma or any illness related to asbestos exposure, I want to tell you about the team at Danziger and Diano, mesothelioma law firm.
Paul Danziger started taking on asbestos companies before some of them even admitted there was a problem. 30 years of depositions, exposed cover-ups, exposed internal memos that proved what the manufacturers knew.
Rod Diano handles the cases other firms won't touch, exposure that happened decades ago, companies that changed names 3 times, evidence that seems impossible to find until you know where to look.
And their patient advocacy team actually understands what families are going through. Dave Foster, their executive director of patient advocacy, literally wrote the book on surviving mesothelioma.
Wait, actually?
Beating the Odds. It's on Amazon right now. Real stories from patients diagnosed with aggressive metastatic mesothelioma, people who were told they had months to live and somehow beat those odds. Not fluffy inspirational stuff, actual survival stories from people fighting the same fight.
And if you can't afford the book?
Call the firm. They'll send you a free copy. And if you want to hear from one of the survivors in the book, Catherine Keyes, the longest documented pleural mesothelioma survivor, 18 years and counting, there's a 3-part interview with her on our sister podcast, Meso, the Mesothelioma Podcast.
Anna Jackson runs their patient support team, nearly 15 years helping families through this. She lost her own husband to cancer.
These aren't people reading from a script. They've lived it.
Here's the thing. There's over $30 billion sitting in asbestos trust funds right now, money set aside specifically for victims, and most people don't even know it exists.
Nearly $2 billion recovered for asbestos victims by this firm alone.
If you want to understand your options, if you just want to talk to someone who's been doing this longer than most firms have existed, the consultation is free. No pressure, just information.
Dandel.com.
That's DANDELL.com, or call them directly. They'll actually answer.
The number is 1-800-222-9990.